Chad Whitmore had it all: a corner office with a view of the Manhattan skyline, a personal driver, and the unwavering respect of Wall Street. As CEO of Whitmore Health Tech, a billion-dollar medical technology company, his name was synonymous with success. But recently, the board had grown uneasy. Anonymous complaints were surfacing, allegations of unethical treatment of staff, missing equipment, and internal sabotage. Chad's first instinct was to order a full audit, but audits only scratched the surface. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, unfiltered, raw, and honest. That's when the idea struck: go undercover. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's begin the story. A week later, the company's HR office processed a new hire: Charles Walker, a middle-aged janitor with a patchy work history, a limp, and a fake mustache. Underneath the uniform and prosthetics was Chad himself. His first day began at 5:30 a.m. in the employee locker room. The cement floors were cold, the fluorescent lights harsh, and the coffee machine already broken. The janitor supervisor gave him a mop and directed him to Building C, one of the oldest warehouses in the complex. The moment Chad stepped into the building, he felt something different. It wasn't just the musty smell of old cardboard and antiseptic. It was the atmosphere, stiff, silent, and watchful. As he mopped near the loading docks, a voice broke through the silence. "Hey, new guy," a woman called out. He turned to see a petite woman with tired eyes and a ponytail too tight for comfort. She wore a name tag: Ava Collins. She was lifting boxes onto a dolly far too heavy for her frame. Chad nodded. "Yeah, Charles." She smiled faintly. "You'll get used to the smell. Or maybe not." They shared a quiet laugh. She didn't treat him like a nobody. That stood out. By noon, Chad had already witnessed two supervisors berating a younger employee for clocking in late, despite his explanation that he had stayed overnight to finish inventory. Another woman in tears was told to pull herself together by a manager when she asked for time off to attend her daughter's school event. The worst was the silence. No one questioned the injustice. It was accepted like the stains on the warehouse floor, just part of the job. Chad finished his shift exhausted but alert. This wasn't just inefficiency. It was cultural decay. But he needed more than anecdotes. He needed proof. And so began his 2-week journey as a janitor. Over the next few days, Chad observed. He saw who arrived early but got no recognition, who stayed late and covered for others, who abused their position and who simply endured. He noted every name, every action. He also noticed Ava again. She was always working, always quiet, but there was something behind her eyes, determination laced with sorrow. One afternoon, she stayed after her shift to wipe down equipment in a section that wasn't even hers. "You don't have to do that," Chad whispered. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "If I don't, no one will. And this place matters to me." Chad filed the moment away. By the end of the week, Charles the janitor had become invisible to most, but not to those who mattered. Chad was no longer just investigating a company. He was watching a story unfold, a story about power, dignity, and truth hidden in plain sight. The break room in Building C was a narrow, windowless space tucked behind the loading bay, filled with mismatched chairs, a humming vending machine, and a table that looked like it had survived a war. For most employees, it was a sanctuary, 10 minutes of lukewarm coffee and silence before the chaos resumed. For Chad, it was a gold mine of overheard truth. On his 5th day as Charles, Chad arrived early and began wiping down the counters near the microwave, careful to keep his head low. That morning, he wasn't alone. 2 men entered, both mid-level supervisors. One was tall with a buzz cut and loud voice, Mark Greeley. The other, shorter, slick-haired, and constantly checking his phone, Darren Cho. Chad had seen them before, usually standing around, barking orders they didn't follow themselves. "Did you talk to Rick yet?" Darren asked, lowering his voice. "Yeah, he's not worried," Mark replied, cracking open a soda. "Says the quarterly reports are already doctored. Nobody at the top's gonna blink." Chad froze. Still, the shipment discrepancy from last month. What was it? Like $200,000 in missing stock. Mark shrugged. Written off as expired. Classic Rick. The board won't see a thing. Darren laughed, tapping his phone. Love this company. Chad's heart pounded in his chest. His company. His name on every report. He knew about minor supply issues, but this was theft disguised in paperwork. And Rick Dalton, the company's head of human resources, was in the middle of it all. The two men walked out, never once acknowledging the janitor by the sink. Later that day, Chad found Ava in the corner of the break room, eating a sandwich with her elbows tucked close to her chest. She looked exhausted, and her eyes were red. You okay? Chad asked quietly. She hesitated. Lucas, my son, he was in the ER again last night. Heart complications. I asked Rick if I could come in late today, and she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Chad felt a wave of anger. And he told me if I missed one more shift, I'd be written up for unreliability. Her lips trembled. But I can't lose this job. Not with Lucas needing surgery. She blinked fast, trying to swallow the emotion. Chad nodded, gently placing a bottle of water in front of her. He couldn't say anything else, not without revealing himself. But inside, the CEO in him was screaming. Later, in the hallway, he noticed another employee, a young man named Eddie, limping for what looked like a sprained ankle. He was still moving boxes. Chad offered to help, but Eddie refused. They'll think I'm slacking, he whispered. I can't afford to lose hours. The rot ran deeper than Chad imagined. This wasn't just about theft. It was about fear, about a system where good people like Ava and Eddie were punished while others skimmed profits in plain sight. That night, Chad sat alone in his temporary janitor's closet, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above him. He pulled out a small notebook and began jotting names, times, incidents, everything. He couldn't confront them yet, not without hard evidence. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just a business issue. It was personal now. It was nearly midnight when Chad rolled his mop bucket down the dimly lit corridor of Building C. Most employees had gone home, leaving only the hum of machines and the occasional clank of metal echoing through the silence. The night shift wasn't glamorous, but it was when the building breathed the truth. No eyes, no pretense, just raw reality. Chad wasn't supposed to be there. As Charles the janitor, he was scheduled for day shifts. But after the conversation in the break room, he needed to see more. Needed to see who stayed behind and why. He passed through the inventory bay and paused. The overhead lights were still on. Inside, Ava was there alone. She was sorting boxes, carefully checking labels, cross-referencing papers on a clipboard. Her movements were slow, deliberate, tired but focused. She wore a worn hoodie over her work uniform, and her ponytail was even messier than usual. Chad stood at the door. Didn't think anyone worked graveyard here, he said quietly. Ava jumped, then relaxed when she recognized him. Charles, you scare me. Saw the just passing through. He walked in slowly. What are you doing here? She looked embarrassed. Just finishing up. Some of the pallets were mislabeled. If I don't fix them, it'll get blamed on me in the morning. Chad frowned. Shouldn't someone from the management team handle that? She chuckled bitterly. They don't come near the stockroom after 5. Besides, Rick made it clear. Fix it or get written up. So here I am. She went back to work. Chad picked up a box cutter from a nearby shelf and began helping. Ava blinked. You don't have to. I'm here. Might as well do something useful, he said with a small grin. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Chad glanced at her profile. Lines of stress marked her face, but there was also strength. This wasn't just a woman trying to keep a job. This was a mother surviving for her child. Lucas okay? He asked. She didn't look up. The doctors say he needs surgery within the next 6 months. Pediatric heart valve replacement. Without it, her voice broke. I've applied for financial aid. Twice. Denied both times. My insurance here barely covers the inhalers. Chad felt something shift inside him. A mix of guilt and fury. This was his company. These were his employees. And yet here she was, working nights off the books, terrified to ask for help. You ever thought about leaving? He asked. Ava sighed. Where would I go? This job pays more than most. And Lucas likes it here. He made a friend at school. First time in years. I can't just uproot him again. Chad nodded slowly. Her words struck him harder than expected. A few minutes later, she stopped looking around. Thanks for the help, Charles. You're different. He chuckled. Different how? Most janitors don't talk much. Or listen. You do both. He gave her a mock salute. Guilty as charged. She smiled. A small, tired smile that stayed with him long after he left the warehouse. That night, Chad returned to the janitor's closet and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The man in the mirror didn't look like a CEO, but maybe that was the point. He realized then that his plan to simply collect evidence and fix the system quietly wouldn't be enough. People like Ava needed more than justice. They needed someone who cared, someone who was watching. And he was. The following Monday, the factory buzzed with its usual rhythm: clattering machines, beeping scanners, shouted orders from floor supervisors. But Chad Whitmore, still cloaked in his janitor uniform, had a different mission. He had seen enough to know something rotten was festering at the heart of his company. Now he needed proof. Late that afternoon, Chad noticed Rick Dalton's office door left slightly ajar. Rick, always flashy in his tailored suits and Rolex watches, had left for a client dinner. In reality, Chad knew he was likely on the golf course with Darren and Mark. This was his chance. Chad slipped inside. The office smelled of cologne and cigars. Trophies lined the shelves: Employee of the Year, Top Recruiter, Leadership in HR. A joke, Chad thought bitterly. He bypassed the awards and went straight to the desk. He opened the drawers, careful not to leave a trace. Most were filled with pens, branded stress balls, and unopened HR brochures. But the bottom drawer was locked. He reached into his janitor belt. He had prepared for this. A thin screwdriver popped the lock after a few tense tries. Inside were two folders marked Internal, Do Not Distribute. He opened the first. Inside were vendor invoices, except they didn't match what the finance team had reported. Items listed as $1,200 surgical kits were marked up to $3,800 in these files. Payments had been routed through third-party suppliers with unfamiliar names. Chad photographed every page with a hidden phone in his jacket. The second folder was worse. It contained termination letters and incident reports for over a dozen employees, many of whom Chad had seen working hard in Building C. One of them was Ava Collins. Her report was filled with exaggerated claims, attitude issues, refusal to comply with protocol, absentee tendencies. It was clear someone was trying to build a case against her. He clenched his fists. Suddenly, a noise. Footsteps in the hall. Chad shoved everything back, closed the drawers, and darted into the janitor's closet 2 doors down. He held his breath as 2 voices echoed past. Rick and Darren, returning earlier than expected. We'll push the budget cut through Friday, Rick was saying. Those warehouse kids won't know what hit them. Chad waited until the voices faded. Back in his closet, he locked the door, sat on a crate, and opened his phone. He flipped through the photos he'd taken. Evidence of embezzlement. Corruption. Abuse of power. But something else gnawed at him. Ava's file. Why target her? He remembered the night she stayed late, fixing mislabeled pallets. The way she kept smiling even when her world was crumbling. Why would Rick want her gone? Unless she knew something too. That evening, Chad approached Jenna Monroe, Rick's administrative assistant. He had noticed her watching more than she let on. She was sharp, too sharp to not see what was happening. She was typing at her desk when he walked by with a mop. Evening, Chad said casually. Late night. Jenna gave a tired smile. Always. He leaned closer, voice low. You ever wonder what's really going on upstairs? She looked up sharply. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. A pause. I can't talk here, she said quietly. Meet me in the break room. After close. She returned to typing, her face unreadable, but her eyes told a different story, fear but also resolve. As Chad walked away, he knew he had found an ally. The pieces were coming together, and someone was about to be exposed. The air in the main conference hall felt heavier than usual. It was Thursday morning, and every department head, manager, and senior staff member had been summoned for a special announcement. No one knew what it was about. Whispers spread like wildfire through the halls. Some said it was a surprise audit. Others feared mass layoffs. but none of them suspected the truth. At the head of the long, glass table stood Chad Whitmore, not in his janitor uniform, but in a crisp navy suit and polished shoes. His familiar face caused a ripple of shock. "Mr. Whitmore?" Rick Dalton blurted, his voice cracking. "We weren't told you'd be joining." Chad's expression was unreadable. "Good morning. I've been around. Just not in the way you're used to." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. A few glanced toward the back, where the janitor's mop bucket still sat, unnoticed. Chad tapped the folder in front of him. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've been working undercover in this very facility. I've seen how some of you treat your people. I've listened to conversations you thought were private, and I've gathered evidence." He paused, locking eyes with Rick. Rick tried to compose himself. I don't know what you mean." Chad opened the folder. "These are vendor invoices showing inflated pricing on equipment routed through shell companies. I've traced the payments and the signatures." He threw down a photo of Rick's signature on a doctored invoice. "And here," Chad continued, "are falsified HR reports created to push out employees who were too inconvenient, including one woman who was targeted simply for asking to care for her sick son." Rick's face turned pale. Darren and Mark sat frozen beside him, their bravado gone. "Do you deny any of this?" Chad asked coldly. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jenna Monroe stepped forward. "I can confirm everything Mr. Whitmore said. I was instructed to delete emails, adjust records, and falsify employee evaluations under Rick's direction. I saved the originals." She pulled out a flash drive and placed it beside Chad's folder. Gas broke out. Some people looked outraged. Others looked down, ashamed. Chad looked around the room. "We are a company that develops life-saving technology. But how can we save lives out there if we're destroying them in here?" He turned back to Rick. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending legal investigation. Darren Cho and Mark Greeley, you're both under review and barred from accessing company systems." Security had already been summoned. The 3 men were escorted out in silence. After they left, Chad addressed the room again. "This isn't about a few bad apples. It's about culture, and I let it rot." He took a breath. "That ends now." Later that day, Chad visited the warehouse floor. Workers looked up as he approached. Not as a janitor this time, but as their CEO. Some clapped quietly. A few simply stared in disbelief. He walked up to Ava, who stood beside a stack of shipping crates. "Hi," she said cautiously. Eruplia. We need to talk." She glanced around, worried. "About what?" "About your son, and your future here." He smiled gently. "Pack your things. You're being promoted." She blinked. "What?" "You're the new head of logistics operations, with full benefits. And I've already spoken with our foundation. We'll cover Lucas's surgery." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood tall. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing us." Chad nodded. "No, thank you for reminding me who we are." As he turned to walk away, the workers started clapping. One by one, louder, stronger. And in that moment, the company began to heal. A week had passed since the confrontation. The halls of Whitmore Health Tech buzzed with cautious optimism. For the first time in years, people looked one another in the eye. They spoke in tones above a whisper. The fear was fading. But for Ava Collins, everything still felt surreal. She stood in her new office, well, new to her. The old logistics manager had resigned the day after Rick's suspension. Chad had offered the position to her personally, with no conditions. Her hand still trembled when she touched the desk. The nameplate now read, "Ava Collins, Director of Warehouse Operations." A knock broke her thoughts. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and Chad stepped in, holding a small blue gift bag. "You're settling in?" he asked. Ava nodded. "Still feels like I'm dreaming." Chad smiled. "I get that. First time I sat in the CEO chair, I felt like an imposter." She chuckled nervously. "You clean up better than you mop." They both laughed, really laughed, for the first time since they'd met. Chad placed the gift bag on her desk. "Something for Lucas." She opened it carefully. Inside was a red toy fire truck, a signed Get Well card, and a letter from the company's charitable medical arm confirming a full sponsorship for his surgery. Ava covered her mouth. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Chad replied softly. You've done more for this company with your honesty and integrity than most executives ever will." She blinked fast, holding back tears. "Lucas has his surgery scheduled for next month," he added. "Top specialists in Boston. Everything's been arranged." She finally spoke, voice low. "I've spent so long trying to survive that I forgot what hope felt like." Chad nodded. "Hope is powerful, but it's fragile too. That's why we need people like you to protect it." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, one more thing." He pulled a badge from his pocket. It was a gold employee pass with a small W embossed in the corner, reserved for only 5 people in the entire company. "Executive Trust Pass," he explained. "It grants priority access to medical support, HR resolutions, and direct communication with me. You're part of the team now, Ava. For real." She accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." "Chad," he corrected with a grin. "No more Charles, though." As he exited the office, Ava sat down slowly. She looked at the toy truck on her desk, then at the badge in her hand. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to go home. Elsewhere in the company, changes were happening fast. Jenna Monroe was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer. Anonymous reporting systems were reinstated. The HR department underwent a full restructure, including external audits. And on Monday morning, a simple email went out to all employees. Subject: "We're listening now." From Chad Whitmore. To everyone who's felt overlooked, silenced, or used, this company is yours as much as it is mine. And it's time we start acting like it. Your voices matter. Your work matters. Let's rebuild. Together. Chad. At home that evening, Ava watched Lucas fall asleep with the fire truck beside him. She stroked his hair gently and whispered, "It's going to be okay now." Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, hope burned steady. 6 months later, the atmosphere at Whitmore Health Tech was unrecognizable. Gone were the closed-door whispers, the rigid hierarchy, the silent fear that once lingered in the air like mold. In their place was something fragile but new: transparency, empowerment, trust. And it all started with a mop. The Undercover CEO story had leaked to the press, though not through Chad. A former employee had posted a viral video recounting how the company's janitor turned out to be the man at the top. The internet exploded. Some called it bold. Others said it was performative. But for the people inside the company, it had been transformative. Ava now stood confidently at the front of the monthly employee forum, presenting a new logistics system she'd helped design. She wore a navy blazer, not expensive, but sharp. Beside her sat Jenna Monroe, who smiled and nodded supportively. Chad watched from the back row. He didn't need the spotlight anymore. What he needed was already unfolding. After the meeting, Ava approached him with a report. "Logistics error rates are down 41%, she said. "And morale, well, it's not something I can quantify, but I can feel it." Chad smiled. "That's the best metric we've got." She hesitated, then added, "Lucas had his final checkup. Clean bill of health." His smile widened. "That's the best news I've heard all year." They stood in silence a moment. Then she said, "I still remember the night you helped me with the pallets. You didn't say much, but you were listening. That made all the difference." Chad's voice was soft. People just want to be seen and heard. That afternoon, Chad gathered a small team of department heads for a quiet unveiling of the new company plaque in the lobby. Beneath the Whitmore Health Tech logo, a new company motto was engraved: "Dignity in every detail." It wasn't flashy, but it meant something now. He turned to the group. "This company doesn't run because of tech, or patents, or even innovation. It runs because of people. And the moment we forget that, we lose everything." No applause, just nods of understanding. That night, as workers finished their shifts, Chad made one final stop: the janitor's closet in Building C. It was exactly as he remembered it: cramped, dusty, and filled with forgotten brooms. On the back wall, he placed a small brass plaque, one only few would ever see. Here stood the man who remembered what it meant to serve. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and smiled. The next morning, a new janitor, real this time, arrived for his first day. He found the plaque, read it, and scratched his head. "Weird," he muttered. But when he entered the building, he noticed something different. People held the door open for him. Supervisors asked his name. Even a woman in a blazer, Ava, handed him a fresh cup of coffee and said, "Welcome aboard." He blinked, surprised. "Thanks." She winked. "Everyone matters here. You'll see." As he pushed his car down the hallway, he passed Chad, who nodded and smiled like an old friend. "No taites. No lectures. Just recognition." And that was enough. Months later, Whitmore Health Tech was ranked among the top 10 companies for workplace culture in America. Employee retention soared. So did productivity. Not because of a single act of leadership, but because leadership had become a shared responsibility. And in one quiet office, behind a desk she once feared to approach, Ava Collins kept a framed photo of her and Lucas beside a small, worn mop handle, cut and polished, mounted like a trophy. A reminder that sometimes the lowest place holds the clearest view, and that dignity, once restored, never fades.